February 2026, a message landed on GitHub that tech journalists all over the world felt compelled to repost. It didn't come from a whistleblower. It didn't come from a security firm. It came from one developer talking about one file on one thread, about one company worth more than $3 trillion. His name is Pete Batard. He's a free software developer. And the file he was defending weighs 1.9 megabytes, smaller than most of the photos on your phone, smaller than a 30-second voice memo. And according to Batard, that tiny file owned employees to figure out a way to break his tool's downloads and then rolled that change out on Microsoft's own servers. A $1 trillion company allegedly maneuvering against a single unpaid volunteer. Why would a corporation that size spend engineering time and political capital going after a file smaller than a text message thread? That's the question this video is going to answer. And once you understand what that file actually does, you'll understand exactly why Microsoft can't stand it. The file is called Rufus. If you've spent any real time around IT departments, repair shops, or the kind of forums where people still build their own PCs, you already know the name. If you haven't, here's the number that should stop you. Over 200 million people have downloaded Rufus, not over its lifetime in some vague sense. That's the confirmed download count sitting on its GitHub release page right now in the summer of 2026. It pulls in close to 3 million new downloads every single month. Its GitHub repository sits at roughly 37,000 stars, which for a bare metal C utility with zero marketing budget is an enormous number. Put the 200 million figure in perspective for a second. That's more people than the entire population of Brazil, more people than the population of Russia. All of them, at some point, chose a 1.9 megabyte tool built by one man over whatever path Microsoft had. Formatting utility, a tool that turns a spare flash drive into bootable installation media. That's it. That's the boring, practical, decade-old core function. But bolted onto that function is something that has turned Rufus into one of the most quietly subversive pieces of software on the internet. Rufus lets you install Windows 11 on hardware Microsoft has officially declared incompatible. It bypasses the TPM 2.0 requirement. It bypasses the secure boot check. It bypasses the RAM minimums. It lets you skip the mandatory Microsoft account sign-in during setup and drop into a local account instead, meaning your new install never has to phone home before you can actually use your own computer. It lets you switch off the automatic BitLocker encryption that Windows 11 quietly enables in the background without asking you first. And it lets you pull the raw Windows installation files straight from Microsoft's own content servers, skipping Microsoft's own media creation tool entirely. Compare that against what Microsoft has publicly staked its reputation on in its own messaging around the Windows 11 launch. Microsoft called TPM 2.0 requirements a non-negotiable element for the future of the platform, framing it as the foundation the entire security model is built on. Rufus takes that non-negotiable standard and makes it optional in about 4 clicks. On hardware, Microsoft has told owners is unfit to run modern Windows at all. That collision, a company insisting something is mandatory and a free tool proving in 4 clicks that it isn't, is exactly why this fight keeps happening. And keeps happening is the important phrase, because the February 2026 incident wasn't an isolated flare-up. It was the 3rd time in less than 4 years that Microsoft has taken action, directly or indirectly, that broke Rufus's core functionality. Each time, the tool went down. Each time, it came back, and each time the gap between the block and the fix got a little more revealing about who actually holds the power in this relationship. Here's the part. Almost nobody outside the developer community understands, though. This entire standoff traces back to one decision Microsoft made 5 years earlier, a decision that stranded an almost unbelievable number of working, paid-for computers and effectively created the market Rufus now dominates. To understand why Batard's accusation in February landed the way it did, why hundreds of outlets from PC Gamer to Tom's Hardware to Windows Central all picked it up within 72 hours, you have to go back to June 2021, to the announcement that first drew the battle line between Microsoft and the hardware people already owned. That's where the real story starts, and it's where we're headed next. Because what Microsoft did in 2021 didn't just create a controversy. It created a 400 million person problem that, as of a small hardware security module built into the motherboard, responsible for things like verified boot and hardware-backed encryption. It sounded like a footnote. It wasn't. Machines built before roughly 2017 or 2018 often didn't have that chip at all, or carried an earlier version that didn't clear the bar. Microsoft's own PC health check tool started handing out a blunt verdict to hundreds of millions of people. This PC can't run Windows 11. Nobody agrees on the exact number because Microsoft has never published one. But independent estimates from analysts, from Perg's design to last campaign, and from outlets like The Register and ZDNet, have consistently landed in the same range. Somewhere between 240 million and 400 million machines were effectively stranded. Not broken, not slow. Just old enough, by Microsoft's new definition, to be locked out of the operating system their owners had every reasonable expectation of upgrading to. Microsoft's official advice was simple: buy new hardware or stay on Windows 10 until support ran out. Pete Batard had already been building Rufus for a full decade by that point. He released the first version back in December 2011. The name literally stands for the Reliable USB Formatting Utility with Source, which tells you everything about how unglamorous the original goal was. Before Rufus, the standard option was a clunky, proprietary HP tool. Batard built something free, portable, and open source under the GNU General Public License. No install, no account. Download it, run it, done. For its first 10 years, Rufus lived a quiet life. A T. Admins carried it on keychain USB sticks, repair shops used it to reimage broken laptops, Linux users used it to burn distros. Useful, reliable, completely uncontroversial. Then Windows 11 gave it a second purpose. Batard built the bypass directly into Rufus, replacing the file responsible for hardware checks with an empty stand-in, so there was simply nothing for the installer to validate against. A machine. Microsoft had labeled incompatible, could now run Windows 11 cleanly and stably on hardware. Microsoft itself had called non-negotiable, to exclude. And this is where the pattern that defines the entire story begins. Round 1, August 2022. Microsoft hardened its download APIs, and the change had a side effect. It temporarily broke Fido, the PowerShell script Batard also maintains, which automates pulling official Windows ISOs straight from Microsoft servers without going through the browser. The community found a workaround within days. Batard folded it into the next release. Rufus kept working. Round 2, October 2024. Microsoft shipped the Windows 11 24H2 update, and buried inside it was a quiet but deliberate hardening of the installer, one that specifically detected the empty file trick Rufus had relied on for 3 years and refused to proceed. Users running Windows 11 on unsupported hardware through Rufus suddenly found themselves locked out of a major feature update. Batard's response was almost immediate. Within days, he published a new method built around a set of registry edits that achieved the same result through a completely different mechanism, and future Rufus builds applied the fix automatically. The bypass was back online before most users even understood what had broken it. Round 3, February 2026. This is the one that made global headlines, the one that opened this video. Users started reporting that Rufus could no longer download Windows installation files at all. The built-in ISO downloader, Fido, began failing with cryptic error codes. IP addresses were getting flagged and blocked outright. And this time, Batard didn't just quietly patch it. He went on GitHub and said, plainly, that he believed Microsoft was actively involved. Outlets picked it up within hours. PC Gamer, Tom's Hardware, Windows Central, NeoWin, Hot Hardware, all running versions of the same story inside a 72-hour window in mid-February. Microsoft, as it had done twice before, said nothing official about it. 3 incidents, 3 separate windows of time, August 2022, October 2024, February 2026, spread across 4 years. Same company, same tool, same outcome every single time. Microsoft closes a door, Batard finds a window, and the fix ships before most casual users even noticed the tool was ever down. That's not luck. That's structure. Microsoft has to defend every possible route out of its restrictions. Batard only has to find one they missed. That asymmetry is the whole ballgame, and it's the reason a trillion-dollar company keeps losing to a file smaller than a podcast episode. But here's what should really stop you. Why can't Microsoft just win this outright? They have unlimited engineering budget. They control the servers Rufus depends on. They wrote the operating system it's bypassing. So why, after 3 deliberate attempts across 4 years, does the 1.9 megabyte file still work? Right now, today, in August 2026? The answer isn't really about engineering at all. It's about something Microsoft has no leverage over whatsoever. And it's the part of this story that almost nobody explains properly. That's exactly where we're going next. So why can't Microsoft just win? They have more engineers than Rufus has ever had users of a single release. They own the servers, they wrote the operating system underneath it, and yet, 4 years and 3 deliberate attempts later, the file still works. The answer isn't about money or manpower. It's about something money can't buy. Rufus is open source, and that single fact strips Microsoft of every advantage size usually gives a company. The entire Rufus codebase is public. Anyone can read it. Anyone can fork it. Anyone can patch it and push a new build within hours. When Microsoft hardened its download APIs in August, SDK, it was sitting there in his own open script, visible to anyone who wanted to look. When the appraiser file trick died in the October 2024 update, the community around the project, the people who watch commits, who file GitHub issues within minutes of an update dropping, who cross-reference Windows Insider builds against Rufus's known bypass methods, had already started diagnosing the new block before Batard had finished reading the changelog himself. The same thing happened again in February 2026. Community members on GitHub, on Reddit, on the Windows Insider forums started comparing notes on error codes like 7150.112.3.130 within hours of the first report surfacing. Batard didn't have to run the investigation alone. He had a distributed, unpaid, deeply motivated engineering team he never hired and doesn't pay a cent to. Now compare that to Microsoft's position. Every time Microsoft closes a route, they have to anticipate every possible way around the new restriction on every version of Windows across every hardware configuration in the field forever. Batard only has to find one gap. That math doesn't favor the trillion-dollar company. It never has. It's the oldest asymmetry in security. The defender has to be right. Everywhere, the attacker only has to be right once, except here it's flipped into something almost noble. A lone developer patching a hole, so that ordinary people can keep using computers they already paid for. And there's a second reason Microsoft can't simply shut this down, and it's not technical at all. It's legal. Rufus doesn't distribute Windows. It doesn't bundle a single line of Microsoft's proprietary code. What it does is create bootable installation media from Windows files the user is separately, legitimately entitled to. Either files they already own a license for, or ISOs Microsoft itself makes freely downloadable to the public. Microsoft has no copyright claim over a USB. Formatting utility. There's no patent on the general concept of skipping a hardware check, and they have no legal path to shut down a project. PC Gamer, Neowin, Tom's Hardware, Hot Hardware, all converged on reporting was narrower and, frankly, stranger. Microsoft's content delivery servers started rejecting automated download requests that lacked the browser fingerprints a normal interactive session produces, and Fido's scripted requests got caught in that net. Some reporting, including Hot Hardware's follow-up, pointed out this fraud detection layer may have been aimed more broadly, even snagging some Windows insiders trying to download builds the normal way, which muddies whether this was a Rufus-specific strike or a wider anti-automation sweep that happened to catch Rufus in the crossfire. Batard doesn't fully buy that explanation, and given the previous two incidents, it's easy to see why. Either way, the practical effect was the same. Meanwhile, the stakes underneath all of this were only getting bigger. Windows 10 support officially ended on October 14, 2025. As of this year, StatCounter puts Windows 11 at roughly 73% of the desktop market against Windows 10's remaining share. Real progress on paper. But the holdouts aren't casual laggards anymore. They're the hard cases, an estimated 400 million active PCs that are still, right now, physically unable to meet Windows 11's requirements. Microsoft quietly extended free consumer extended security. Updates a second time this year, pushing the cutoff out to October 12, 2027, without so much as a formal announcement. Just a silent edit to a support page that Bleeping Computer and Windows Latest caught within hours. That's not generosity. That's Microsoft acknowledging, without saying it out loud, that hundreds of millions of people still have nowhere else to go. And that's the environment Rufus is operating in right now, in the second half of 2026. Not as a niche hacker tool, but as the most practical answer available to a genuinely enormous, unresolved problem Microsoft created and still hasn't fixed. Which raises the question we still haven't fully answered. Who are the 200 million people actually behind these download numbers? Because the answer isn't who you'd expect. Here's who you'd expect to be downloading Rufus: sysadmins, repair technicians, the Linux crowd, the people who already had 6 USB sticks in a drawer before any of this controversy started. And sure, they're still in our numbers. But the growth in Rufus's download curve since 2021 doesn't come from that group. It comes from ordinary people who've never touched a command line in their life, who just got told by their own computer that it wasn't good enough anymore. Take the account a how-to geek writer, Jorge Aguilar, gave of his own laptop earlier this year. 7th generation Intel Core i7, plenty of RAM. A graphics card that could still run modern software without breaking a sweat. By any real-world measure, a perfectly capable machine. Microsoft's upgrade tool looked at it and said no. The TPM chip it wanted simply wasn't there. He described the feeling of being told to spend money on new hardware just to satisfy a requirement that had nothing to do with how well his laptop actually performed as unnecessary, even wasteful. His dependable machine hadn't gotten slower. It hadn't gotten worse. It had simply failed to meet a new, seemingly arbitrary line that Microsoft drew 5 years after he bought it. He's not an outlier. He's the median case for somewhere between 240 million and 400 million people. They bought these machines, they maintained them, updated them, kept them running exactly the way they were supposed to. And a company that had zero involvement in how they used those machines decided unilaterally that the hardware it once sold and certified was now inadequate. For most of that group, Rufus became the practical off-ramp. Not because they were technically sophisticated, most weren't, but because a graphical interface with a few drop-down menus was infinitely more approachable than accepting a forced hardware purchase they'd never budgeted for. And that hardware purchase has never been a worse time to make. Right now, in the back half of 2026, DRAM prices have roughly doubled since early last year, driven by manufacturers like Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron diverting wafer capacity toward the AI boom instead of consumer memory. Analysts at IDC are projecting PC and device prices to climb another 10 to 20% before the year is out. So the timing genuinely could not be worse for Microsoft to be telling hundreds of millions of people that the only real fix is new hardware. Every month that memory prices climb is another month where a free 1.9 megabyte tool looks less like a workaround and more like the only financially sane option on the table. Now, to be fair to Microsoft for a moment, because the honest version of this story requires it, the security case for TPM 2.0 isn't manufactured out of thin air. The chip provides real, measurable benefits, hardware-backed encryption keys, a verified boot chain that's much harder to tamper with at the firmware level, protection against a specific class of low-level attacks that software alone can't fully stop. Security researchers, with no commercial stake in the outcome, largely agree the requirement is technically sound. Microsoft is not wrong that newer, TPM-equipped hardware is more secure hardware, full stop. But that's not actually the question worth asking. The question is whether it was reasonable to bolt a genuine security upgrade onto a requirement that simultaneously stranded somewhere close to 400 million paying customers and functionally mandated one of the largest forced hardware replacement cycles in the history of personal computing, during a period, no less, when component prices were about to spike. Both things can be true at once. The chip is a legitimate security improvement, and the way the requirement was rolled out was also extremely convenient for hardware manufacturers who needed a reason for people to buy new machines. Recognizing the first fact doesn't require ignoring the second. Which brings us back to where this video started. One man, one accusation, and a company that has never once responded to it directly. Pete Batard's GitHub profile still just says, free software developer, over 15, years of maintaining Rufus, his consistent argument, echoing the position the Free Software Foundation has held for decades, is that users are entitled to inspect, modify, and control the software running on hardware they already own. You don't have to agree with the ideology to look at the record and see what it produced. A tool used by over 200 million people, maintained without charging anyone a cent, that has now survived 3 separate documented attempts to break it in under 4 years, August 2022, October 2024, and February 2026, and came back working every single time. That asymmetry is the part actually worth sitting with. The largest software company on earth, against one developer and a file that weighs less than most people's email attachments. 3 attempts, 0 official statements. And the file, right now, still runs. So here's where that leaves you, watching this in August 2026, possibly on a machine Microsoft has already told you isn't good enough. The question was never really whether Microsoft's hardware requirements are technically defensible. Plenty of them are. The real question is whether you're going to let a 5-year-old corporate decision force you into a purchase you can't currently afford, on hardware that works perfectly fine. Somewhere close to 400 million people are facing exactly that choice right now, most of them without knowing there's an alternative. You just got the information most of them still don't have. If this pulled together pieces the tech press has only ever covered in fragments, subscribe. Because Microsoft isn't done making this decision for people, and this story isn't over either.